You'll spend 80,000 hours at work. You're here because you want those hours to count. Hi, I'm Zoë Schofield.
And I'm Erica Sosner. A warm welcome to the Career Equation podcast. On this podcast, we take time out from our award-winning careers consultancy to share a game-changing formula to help you solve the sum of your life.
Each week, we and our guests use the Career Equation to explore their story so far and help them unlock the secrets of a fulfilling career. This episode of the Career Equation podcast, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the wonderful Marcie Shaoul. Marcie's the founder of two successful coaching companies, Rolling Stone Coaching for executives and the award-winning Co-Parent Way. Marcie's also the author of The Co-Parenting Method, published by Penguin and due to be released in March 2025. Now, the co-parenting method is a new approach to reducing conflict in co-parenting and is also available as an online learning program. Marcie's also an accredited career coach in our wonderful Career Equation method. Marcie's background is seeing her work in music journalism. She's headed up stakeholder relations and communications for the Commonwealth Foundation and been the director of communications for the Queen Elizabeth Jubilee Trust. So I'm really keen to explore with Marcie what's been the thread through these as we dive into 4 key moments from her story so far. So let's begin. A warm welcome to you then, Marcie. Lovely to have you with me today.
Thank you so much, Zoe. It's lovely to be here.
Brilliant. So before we kind of dive in and explore some key moments in your story so far that have perhaps helped to shape some of the decisions you've made in your career, I'd love to hear a little bit more about what's Marcie's day-to-day world of work like at the moment? What's keeping you busy? And I'm sure our listeners are really curious to know. So what is the Co-Parent Way?
There's lots keeping me busy at the moment, Zoe, and keeping me up at night. So I run 2 businesses. I run Rolling Stone Coaching and I run the Co-Parent Way. And Rolling Stone Coaching is exec coaching, leadership coaching. That's how we know each other. And
Absolutely.
I do a lot of work one-on-one and in teams. And I love that space. It's fun. It's fast moving. And, that's ticking along really nicely at the moment. And then my other business is a co-parent coaching methodology where I take parents who are separating through a 6-step methodology to get them to a place where they can co-parent without conflict. So it's a new approach to reducing conflict in co-parenting, or to eliminating it, actually. We've won awards. We're going to another award ceremony on Wednesday, which is very exciting. And the book is coming out in March. And there's a lot of moving parts in that world at the moment. So I'm just on a massive learning curve in terms of growing the business and reaching as many parents as possible. And I'm on a tech learning curve as well, which is massively out of my comfort zone, but maybe we'll talk about that later.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, just the sort of energy and enthusiasm in your voice for your work at the moment, it sounds like you're in a pretty thriving space already. But I'm really curious to know more about how you've arrived at that as we kind of follow through some of those sort of key moments today. But this new part, this co-parent way that you've developed yourself, that you're the founder of, why was that so important to you?
Great question. They do say that often things are born out of your own experience. And I got divorced 16 years ago when my son was 1, and was potentially a very tricky time, but we did quite well in putting aside our adult differences aside so we could parent our son together. And so out of that was born an understanding of reducing conflict and what was important about that and the impact on our child. And so that was the seed, I guess, that grew into the sapling that's now probably a medium-sized tree, but might eventually be one of those massive oaks. So it was really my own experience, and my career at the time was working in leading communications departments and looking really closely at how people communicated with each other and how they didn't communicate well with each other. And I was specifically working with governments around the world and NGOs and trying to help them get to a place where they could find agreement, find alignment, find things that they wanted to work on together. And what I noticed pretty quickly was that the way governments spoke and what NGOs heard from when they spoke was really different, and how NGOs spoke and what governments heard and the way that they spoke was, there was so misaligned. They were never meeting. Yet actually, if you unpacked it all, there was a lot of the same passions and
Right.
information in there. So I started
Mm.
to understand that it's how you listen. It's the language you use and it's how you listen. And when I was going through my own separation, and then when I retrained to become a coach in 2016, all the pieces of the puzzle started to kind of fit together.
Mhm.
And that's really how the co-parent way methodology, or the
Mhm.
co-parenting method, as the course and the book are called, they were born from that combination of things.
And I think you're so right. Often it is that something we experience drives us to help others, to share what we've learned and what we've discovered. And it sounds like that's a huge passion for you and a skill set that has come through that path of, heading up communications and strategies around that. And the world is in need of that kind of ability, isn't it? To be able to listen really well and to communicate better. And I can imagine that there are thousands and thousands of parents out there that would really, really value some support and guidance around how do I set aside the devastation, the difficulties, the challenges that we're experiencing as adults, but set that aside so that we don't destroy the wonderful relationship that we can have in terms of developing our child. So I think that sounds amazing. And I'm very, very excited for you and will continue to cheer you along as you, I'm sure, win many, many more awards. And so, with that kind of in mind, because when you started, there was so much enthusiasm and energy around what's going on in your world of work at the moment. I'm kind of curious to know then, so what might be the current challenge or conundrum or next stretch for you that's sort of sitting with you in your mind at the moment that is key to the sort of the next move?
Oh, that's a really big one. So it's like really clear for me. And that is, we are learning at the moment how to grow the business using Instagram as a platform. So I'm like many people, many entrepreneurs who start out, have no idea really how to kind of properly utilize social media to reach more people. So I'm on this course at the moment with this great guy who runs it, called Jake Davey. And I am learning, I'm on a learning curve that literally feels vertical. Um, and I'm understanding how actually I've got a message and a method to reduce conflict so kids can grow up in an environment without conflict. And that's really important to me. And if I want to realize my dream of getting that out there to as many separating parents as possible, number one, because I feel it's an obligation that I have to do that. And number two, it's very clearly a business as well. Number one is what drives it. But I need to change the way I market and I approach and I tell people about this. And so we've chosen Instagram as our platform through which to do that, because we think that's where there's many parents are on there looking for support. And I have to do reels and stories and tell people about myself. And I'm actually really private. I'm quite a private person. So it's a big deal for me to kind of put my face there and go, yay, okay, I'm here. I'm open for criticism and I'm open for, whatever you want to throw at me. And that can keep me up at night. So
Mm,
that's my
yeah.
challenge. So
I can feel your pain. I can feel your pain there. You have this drive and this desire, and your potential customers, clients, the parents, if you like, they need something. So it's almost like you were talking about sort of NGOs and governments before about it's getting that bit to meet in the middle, isn't it? Where actually your messaging is hitting the spot for those that are listening so that you capture more people and they're able to, help their children to grow up in a world where they're not experiencing conflict at home, because there's enough out there in the world in general that you want that home space to be a safe haven. So yes, the old Instagram and all those channels that we older folk have to
yeah,
have to
really.
equip ourselves with the skills. So I can absolutely feel that. And what I hope is through our conversation today that maybe there might be some new thinking, or it might unlock some more confidence around like this is stuff that you can do, and like what is it that you need to help that journey feel more comfortable and less of a kind of frightening space, I suppose. Okay, so that's a kind of idea for us to play with and come back and revisit at the end of the conversation about like, is there anything that's come out from what we're talking about today? And I think what will be really helpful is to dive into some key moments and to use the career equation to help us explore a few moments in your career story so far that have helped shape and define who you are or made an impression on you, if you like. And you're not new to the career equation because for our listeners, just so that you know, Marcie's also an accredited career coach in our method. And Marcie and I often deliver training to coaches actually in this method and approach. And so it's not new to Marcie. But what's so wonderful about the equation is it continues to help us individually as coaches in our own journeys, in our own careers, but also those people that we get to work with as well. So let me just explain to those of you who are new to the career equation what it is. So the career equation is essentially a way by which we can understand what is our thriving zone when it comes to our world of work. And there are 4 key components of the career equation. The first being skills. So what we want to do is play in our area of skill and strengths. So we're really using the things that we love to use, that we want to develop further, that we're curious to find out more about. Then we want to apply it to an area of passion. So passion is all about playing in our area of curiosity, of energy, of intrigue, of excitement. So any sort of topics, industries will help us do that. Third component is impact. So here we want to be able to see a result of our work. We want to know that we're making a difference in the way that we do our work. And that is both for us personally, but also for those that we get to work with and who we are surrounded by. And the fourth component is environment. All of that stuff has to happen in an environment that helps us to be at our best, that nourishes us. So that can be anything from the location, the people, the values, the hours, the freedom, the autonomy, the regulation. All of those things go into making up the environment in which we do our work. So get all 4 components right: skills, passions, impact, environment, then you're on the way to your thriving career. So that's not new to you, Marcie. You know all about the career equation. But I'm really excited to just explore with you some of those moments around those key components. So if we take the idea of skills first, I'd love you to tell me about a time when you kind of look back and you think, I really discovered there that I had a skill or strength in something. What kind of memory comes to mind for you?
Well, I think there are 2. I think the first one is probably from when I was quite small, and I see this now in my daughter and how she approaches the world. And that is, she sees everything that's going on, and she puts it all together. And I think I couldn't have told you that was a skill of mine then, but I knew that I noticed everything, how people were responding, how people were reacting, and I could draw kind of conclusions. That's probably too grown up for a 7, 8, 9-year-old, but I could understand how people therefore were feeling and how they might respond to things. And that's probably always been with me. And I don't know if it's a skill. I don't think it's a learned skill. I think it's just part of who I am. But the second one was definitely in my 20s, and I'd been working as a music journalist, and I went on holiday. I went traveling around East Africa. And I had a kind of a moment where I realized that I loved music and I loved going to gigs and getting CDs because it was that long ago, and reviewing albums and meeting all my idols and interviewing them and doing all that stuff. But it wasn't fulfilling enough for me. It was lovely and fun, but it didn't feel massively fulfilled by it. And we went traveling, and I've always been interested in kind of what's going on internationally. And I had my eyes opened in a really big way. And I came back and I thought, okay, you know what? I think I'm just going to go back to listening to music and going to gigs rather than working in this field. And I thought I want to write. I always loved writing stories, short stories, poems. I used to send off to kind of competitions and have work published. And it was definitely kind of one of those secret passions, maybe not so secret, but it was something that I liked to do. And I thought, I want to write a book. And everyone was like, oh, don't be silly. You're only 20. I don't know how old I was, 24, something like that. You can't possibly write a book. But I was like, no, I want to write a book. And it was probably at that point that I started to realize how some might call it stubborn. Others might call it focused if they're being, if they're being polite. And I left my job. I quit my job and I took a year off. And I sat down every day and I wrote a novel. And it was, 90,000 word novel. And I loved the process. I was really disciplined, which I probably would never have used that word about myself before that point. I was self-motivated, which I did not know that I had in me. In fact, I was more motivated because I was doing it my way. And this was kind of a real aha moment for me. I was doing it my way, my terms, my ideas, didn't have to answer to people. There wasn't like massive critique coming down the path, potentially. And I loved it. And I'd work for like 10 hours a day. on this book, and I finished it. It was great. It was fun. And then I did nothing with it, and I went back to work and got a job because I was skint. And that's fine, actually. It didn't matter that I didn't do anything with it. Really, it was process which taught me so much about myself.
Yeah, I understand that. And what's really interesting there is to kind of think about, and I guess the question I want to ask you is how does that play into what you're doing now in terms of skills? When you think about that now in terms of your world of work now and what you're doing, how are those strengths and skills coming into play now?
They're all there. The
Yeah.
self-motivation, the ability to think strategically and to trust myself that how I want to do something is the right way, just because it's different.
Mm.
And often it is different. How I approach something, is okay to back myself. But the self-discipline, the work, the commitment to achieving something, probably I'm quite competitive with myself, much more than with other people. I don't feel I'm competitive with other people. I like to push
Mhm.
myself. And I really, really, really like to enable change. So when I have clients and I'm working with my clients, and working with
Mm.
every single one of them is a privilege because I always learn from them. You know that, right? We often say that when we're teaching, the career equation to coaches. It's like, it's amazing as a privilege. And working one on one and seeing my clients grow, seeing them realize the potential, watching those moments where their eyes just go, oh, that is like
Mm.
amazing. And then in the co-parenting, seeing them go from not speaking to each other to being able
Mm.
to have a conversation, even if it's very forced and awkward about their child, and their child can see their parents talking to each other, it's massively rewarding. And so it's all of those things, really.
And I think that's what's so clear there is that thread between you said right back in your really early days when you were able to notice lack of communication or communication, understand and sort of take a temperature check of the mood in the room. That was the sort of impression I was getting that you were able
Yeah.
to see different sides, how much that comes into play into the work that you're doing now, because that ability to put parents at ease that they can then spark a conversation where, the defenses are down a little bit and, in terms of being able to communicate with each other in a way that's more meaningful than perhaps what's been happening before or no communication. But also in that coaching space, we know how important it is for clients to feel in a safe space, to be able to feel at ease and in a trusted space to know that they are okay to explore what's going on inside and think about, what's happening in their life. So it really does thread through right from those early days, those sort of what you wouldn't have seen as skills and strengths back then, how
Yep.
much they've continued to play a really, really strong part in your kind of career journey, and particularly now, I think. So thank you for sharing that with us. So moving on to the idea of passion then, when you think about a memory or a time in your life, what comes to mind for you around a time when you think, I absolutely was loving what I was doing right then? Like if I could bottle that and think, oh, I loved it. What comes to mind for you around that?
Well, I might answer it in a slightly different way, if you don't mind,
Yeah, of
only
course.
because
Yeah.
I know this equation well.
Mhm.
And I think for me, passion hasn't always been about enjoyment. It's things that I felt really strongly
Yeah.
about.
So inner
And
passion about.
inner passion, exactly. And
Mm.
I think because there's been lots of things that I've really enjoyed and felt like I've been thriving. And I would say that about my work now. I kind of feel like I'm in that place all the time. I'm really lucky. One of the memories of kind of feeling passionate is around conflict and, watching the news and watching conflicts globally unfold and watching the kind of the needless devastation that follows has always touched me very viscerally. Like I really have a response to that, that I feel very strongly that actually if we all take responsibility for ourselves and our actions, then conflicts would reduce or disappear. And that's really simplistic. I know that. And the thoughts are much more complex, but really that's probably the bottom line is around how do we take responsibility as people
Mm.
and as groups of people and as leaders. And actually, this is, this podcast focuses a lot on leadership. And I think that leadership is critical to reduce conflict. And so that is something that I'm extremely passionate about. And I was passionate about it at age 5 when I was watching the news with my parents. Probably I was a bit older, maybe I was 6 or 7. And, there was a big CND sign, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament sign on the TV. And I said to my parents, "Oh, what's that?" And obviously there was a lot of protests going on around that time in the very early 80s. That's how old I am. And my parents were like, "Oh, it's, Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament." And I think there was a lot of disruption at the time. So they weren't massively positive about the
Mm.
protesters. But I was like, but surely that's a great idea. Surely I remember it so specifically, isn't that a good thing? I said, isn't that a good thing? And from that moment, I think, I can trace throughout my life that conflict is something that I think we need to resolve right
Mm.
to now when I'm working with parents who are in conflict.
Yeah, and I think that was where I wanted to kind of like inquire again, is that where I guess both of your businesses stem from? Like, obviously, I think the co-parent way, it's more visual, isn't it, in terms of what we've been talking about already, about how you want to help ensure that children grow up in an environment where parents have separated, where there's minimal conflict and friction in the households to make sure that journey is as easy as possible for kids. But also, I think it still comes into play in terms of your coaching, because the conflict is often then the person with themselves.
Yeah.
It's that internal conflict, isn't it? Between, I'm too old to do that job. No, you're not too old. All those things that kind of come into play as barriers that we put in our way personally. What do you think about that?
Such a good observation, and I hadn't thought of it like that. My brain immediately went to, because I do kind of conflict resolution in teams and kind of
Yes.
between, managers as well in my exec coaching business. But you're
Mm,
absolutely right. That internal conflict, that internal struggle that we all have, the imposter
mm,
syndrome, the stories we tell ourselves, it
mm.
is huge. And, understanding how to kind of untangle the spaghetti of that internally is really important. And that's probably the essence of the kind of coaching, that we do, right? Is helping
Yeah.
people be the best version of themselves by untangling that massive
Yeah. And
ball
I've
of
now got this vision of spaghetti balls of spaghetti being sort of, it is that sort of smoothing, isn't it?
yeah,
Smoothing it, calming the
yeah.
waters. And yeah, I like that. I'm all for the visuals. I'm always for the visuals.
I know.
And I think that's really interesting to see that something is so ingrained within you, if you like, at an early age. And you're really right to point that out about this idea of passions. It isn't always from a happy smiley place, in terms of that energy. And that's why we talk about curiosity, energy, intrigue, to want to be playing in and around that space. And that's not always necessarily place of comfort if it is around those sort of more passionate subjects, if you like, around, it could be anything, climate change, education,
Yeah.
homelessness, all those sorts of things that get us in our gut, that we want to
Mm.
see a better world for. I think I can understand why you sort of explained your stance on time, that idea of passion. So thank you for doing that.
So remember, when you're considering your passions, don't just think about the things that you absolutely love to do. Also think about the things that you get inner passion about, things that you care deeply about, strongly about, that you want to solve. And of course, they can come from a range of topics and industries such as climate change, conflict resolution, alternative education, animal welfare, and so on. So really make sure you go wide with your thinking about the things you love to do, but also the things that get you inner passion and fired up.
So, in terms of the third component, which is impact, and this idea of wanting to feel successful in our work, to feel fulfilled, and that we're making a difference in a way, what memory comes up for you around that in terms of when you felt, gosh, my work is really making a difference here, and I'm really, really feeling fulfilled around that?
It's definitely been in my coaching, because you get feedback very quickly from people
Mm.
as to the impact that the work you're doing with them is having on their lives and in their careers. And I think the first few times that happened, it was quite mind blowing, actually, that it helps alleviate your own imposter syndrome. Sometimes when you're in front of someone, you're like, oh my goodness me, like, how do I reach this person? And then when you do, and when there's an impact, and sometimes you don't always know that you're having an impact until much, much later down the line. But that is hugely rewarding. And probably the thing that's even more rewarding than that is when I'm working with co parents, and they don't need to like each other. We're not interested really in that. We're interested in them being able to work together to bring up their children. And when they get from a place where they've not been able to do that,
Yeah.
to even a step on that journey, on that path, that's massively rewarding because it's the children that are the end user, if you like, of that methodology.
Mm.
So both of those things, I wouldn't say they're memories as such. They're kind of current, they're ongoing,
Yeah.
but that impact
Mm.
is really important.
And I think what is really key in this idea around impact is that it's driven by what matters most to you. So it sort of marries together with your passion, really, in terms of that
Yeah.
conflict resolution. So you're seeing a difference in your work. So you can see that conflict sort of diminishing, you can see that spaghetti, if you like, unraveling before you and sort of smoothing out. So I can imagine how fulfilling that must be, given what you're great at, what you're passionate about, and you're therefore seeing a difference in the work that you do. And I guess the question then is how you continue, isn't it, to have that impact by further reach. So when we talked about your sort of conundrum or challenge at the beginning, you were talking about stepping into the world of Instagram and trying to reach, if you like, with the co-parent way, more people, more families, more parents. I guess that's the next step of that impact, isn't it? What we want then is for you to feel the result of your work reaching more people, unraveling more spaghetti out there in terms of that conflict. Would that be fair?
Yeah, definitely. That's the reason for doing it. It's hard work to work with people in conflict, but it feels it's bigger than me. It's got to bring about a change somehow.
Yeah. And I guess I'm sort of like stepping slightly aside just because I'm curious and it's come to my mind. And the sort of like, so what if we don't question, what's the alternative world for all these kids that are growing up in conflict at home with parents? Like, what does that result in terms of your experience for kids that don't have parents that are able to communicate effectively and work together to raise children? What does it mean for the world?
Well, I think that the studies are around this idea of sustained conflict. So not just one argument or 5 arguments, but there's children experiencing their parents or their caregivers in sustained conflict is really damaging to their mental health because they don't learn how to resolve conflict, which is critical. Don't learn how to form healthy relationships where there are ups and there are downs, right? So that's also in life, there are always ups and downs. We need to know how to deal with that. We need to know how to be resilient. And, kids who experience sustained conflict can either, I mean, I'm being a bit black and white here, but, can either increase their risk-taking behavior depending on their age. It depends what they do, or they become massively introverted. If they're little, maybe bedwetting, tummy aches, clingy, people pleasing. We see that in adults a lot who have been in sustained conflict when they've been children. And if you take it more broadly, which I'd quite like to do, and you take it into a more of a social arena, if you imagine the amount of kids each year who are growing up in sustained conflict and their responses and how they grow into adults, what's then the social impact of that? What's the kind of the behavioral impact? How does that play out in school, in university, in work, in their relationships, how they treat men, how they treat women, how they treat everybody? And also what's the financial impact, right? Because if you need extra support, it's just massive. I think you sustain conflict when you don't know how to resolve conflict. Again, big sweeping statement, but
no, but I think it highlights at what cost, so it's at what
yes.
cost to the children individually in their situation, at what cost to them, but also to community, to society, etc. Expands, doesn't it? And so I can really see how it's so important that the more tools and approaches that we can share with people, with parents, around how to sort of reduce that conflict and to work together to bring children up will be so powerful, not just for them in their family situation, but, the community and world at large.
And I think if you're going to kind of take away one thing from this, whether you're a co-parent or whether you're just in conflict or whether you're a government official, I think long term, like what's the long term impact? And if we don't resolve the short term situation, then the long term impact is always bigger. So that's really important to remember.
Thank you, Marcie. Asking, so what if we don't, is a powerful way to challenge assumptions, clarify the stakes, and get buy-in when launching change initiatives. And here's why it's a great question to explore with employees and teams.
Firstly, it creates urgency and context, shifting the focus from why do we have to do this to what happens if we don't. Secondly, it surfaces unspoken concerns, helping leaders to address doubts before they turn into silent disengagement. And thirdly, it encourages ownership and alignment, helping to shift the mindset from this is being done to us to this is a strategic choice. So try asking the question in a team setting, what happens if we don't? Explore the risks of staying the same, encourage open discussion, don't rush to sell the idea immediately, and use real examples, industry shifts or competitor moves to ground the conversation.
And actually, it does kind of sort of lead in quite nicely into the fourth component, which is environment. So you and I both know that it's a really, really important part of the career equation, in that unless we're in the right conditions to thrive, then we will really struggle to utilize those skills, to utilize the passion and make a difference in a way, because we'll be constrained by the environment that we're in. So when we think about environment and a memory for you, I want to kind of switch it, if you like, to a slightly more uncomfortable place and ask you to think about a time when you felt like the environment was actively working against you, where you thought, "Ooh," you really weren't able to be Marcie at your best. So what comes to mind for you around that?
I think you might have heard me say this one or two times before, but after I'd written the book and I went back to work, I ended up working, first job in communications, working in a small UK-based human rights organization, which, did some amazing work. However, I think it was a difficult environment to work in. I didn't easily connect with other people there, or they didn't easily connect with me. I think it was definitely a two-way thing. The work that I produced, they wanted it to be kind of always perfect, which is fair enough, but it was hyper criticized. And that was very difficult. So I felt that in that situation, my confidence diminished massively. And I actually became, a really small version of myself, afraid to go into work, afraid to even give out a Christmas card face to face to people, because I was afraid to interact with them, which is really far away from the person that I was and also the person who I am now. So there was kind of a 2.5 year window in my life where, going into work was difficult and not happy at all. The work that the organization did, I, really stood behind, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough.
What's really interesting is how your voice and your body language completely changed when you were
Yes,
giving
I
that
know.
answer, because your words became shorter and your whole aura sort of,
Yeah.
condensed, if you like, was more restricted. So it was really interesting that as soon as you kind of go to that place of like where you didn't enjoy the
Mm.
environment, what a difference it made to you personally, as opposed to the energy and things that we've heard from you around, other areas of work. But I guess one thing I suppose I'm a little bit curious to kind of to think about is in the work that you do now, you're running your own businesses, most people will be thinking, oh, that'd be amazing. Your environment must be perfect all the time. But I'm sure there's elements where things aren't always feeling fabulous from an environment point of view. And I wonder if there's something there around how do you look after Marcie when you are coming off the back of maybe coaching two parents who've been at each other's throats? And like, how do you make sure that your environment continues to help you to be at your best?
That's a really good question. And I think that since COVID, we're all at home a lot more. Well, I'm at home. Most of my clients are on Zoom. I go into town for meetings, but certainly not every day. And so the environment can mean that my environment, when it's not working so well for me, feels quite small. So making sure I'm out and about in town. This year, I've been sick of it the last few years. There's been no I think I should organize a Christmas party. There's a couple of people I'm like, right, we are going out this year to celebrate Christmas. Taking a bit of responsibility, I think, is what I'm trying to say rather than waiting for it to happen to me. The other thing that's really important to me is a tidy environment. And I work at home and share an office, not when I'm coaching, obviously, but with my husband who runs his own business too. And I'm looking around the office at the moment. I'm glad you can't see it because it's like a bomb has gone off in here. And that I don't find very conducive to thriving.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
what I do is I make sure I get outside every day. I go out with my dog. I live next to some woods. I walk there. I exercise. I try and eat quite well, not drink too much coffee. I do try and do all of those, broccoli and breathing kind of things. But yeah, those are important to me. But I think what's really important to me in my environment is people, finding the like-minded clients who want to change, who want to grow, who want to co-parent rather than the people who don't. There's more energy, it's faster, it's more exciting, has more impact. So, we all attract the people that we want to work with by what we give out. So
yeah. And I think what's, really helpful there is for all of us to remember that, the idea that our environment will be perfect 24 hours a day, all of the time, even when you're loving your job, is just, you're setting yourself up for some failure there if you think that's realistic. But what is really important is that we recognize what we need to do to sort of replenish and rejuvenate when we maybe have had a difficult day, or we've had a difficult client, or it's been a tricky subject, or we're learning Instagram and we're completely out of our comfort zone. What is it that we need to do to sort of refill the batteries, if you like? So I think that's really helpful, because there are things that are within our control and there are things that are outside of our control. So it's like grasping the things that we can do something about to make sure that you continue to have this passion for what you do and see the difference in the work that you do and develop your skills. We need to make sure that that environment, or I like to think of it as the soil that we're planted in, is really feeding us what we need. And so there are decisions that we have to make, I think, on a daily basis about what matters to me right now in terms of I need to get some air before I can focus on that next thing, or, what are those things? So thank you for kind of telling us the reality that it's not all roses, is it? It's not all, what did you say? It's not all broccoli and breathing. Fabulous. So, I would like us to kind of get to the point we can kind of reflect on some of those things that this discussion and this conversation has been sort of bringing up for you, and have an opportunity to summarize it into a fresh career design statement. So, that's a framework that we use to help people kind of articulate those key components of the equation for them and what matters most to them. And I know that you will have done a career design statement before, but I thought we'd give it a go and see what like a fresh view from today might look like. Are you kind of up for giving that a go?
Yeah, okay.
So the idea of this, folks, is that what we do is, we're having explored some ideas around the equation. We want a way of articulating that. Like, what is Marcie's thriving zone? What matters most to her right now? So we use a framework to help us do that. And what's really easy is there's some words already, and then Marcie fills in the blanks, and then we'll see where that takes us in terms of what comes up. So the first bit, because it's super easy, which is your name. You just need to say your name.
I'm Marcie.
There you go. You've got it already. We'll use my skills in. So what would be the sort of top 2 or 3 skills that come to mind for you now that like really matter to you to be utilizing on a day-to-day basis?
We'll use my skills in teaching people to listen well, and use appropriate language. Maybe that's not a skill, but use my skills in communication's too broad, right? In teaching people to listen well, and my skill of enabling a safe space for my clients.
Cool. And my passion for. So again, what's the kind of 2 or 3 passions or inner passion, remembering what you said earlier, what really matters to you in terms of that area of passion?
And my passion for reducing conflict.
Fabulous. 2. So what's the impact that you want? What's the result that you want to see? The difference you want to make?
If we're being specific for the co-parent way, maybe it's to enable children to grow up in a safe, stable environment so they're happy, because I think that's the crux of it, isn't it?
You want to see your kids flourish, don't you, ultimately? So
yeah.
An environment that is what works best for you? What's the key things for you?
An environment that is, what's the word? When you're working with people that want to create change, an environment that is forward focused, maybe not backwards focused, real, like I can't be doing with falseness, fun, if it can be fun, conflict free, and calm. Calm is good.
Brilliant. Okay. So let's just see where we get to, and I'll kind of pull this together. So this is what I heard. As you know, this is something that you'll continue to develop, and you might want to take some bits of this and play with it a bit more. But what I heard was, I, Marcie, will use my skills in teaching people to listen well and enabling a safe space for clients, and my passion for reducing conflict to enable children to grow up in a safe, secure environment so they're happy, and an environment that is forward focused, is real, fun and calm works best for me.
Great. Thank you.
How does that land?
Yeah, it lands. Well, it's completely different from the first time that I ever did this. And it's really specific. And I like that. I think, sometimes the more specific these statements are, the better. And sometimes clients need them to be broad because they need them to be broader for whatever reason. But for me at the moment, the specificity is helpful.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of helps, particularly because you wear a couple of hats, in terms of
Yes.
and I've thought about this for myself often because that I do this work, I coach independently, and I also do art. And I feel like, maybe I do need to push myself to write my design statement for my art. And that might help me find more specificity in what I'm doing there. So a good pickup on that.
Have you not done that?
I haven't.
Do you know
No.
you're such an amazing, for anyone that's listening, don't edit this out. She's such an amazing artist, and doing your statement for it might help you do more.
Thank you, Marcie. I'm going to put that as my action from this from this podcast. Everyone will hold me to account now if
They
this
will.
isn't edited
That's
out.
great. Yeah, no.
So I'm curious, given what you've just kind of pulled together in a quick and what we often say messy draft of a statement, and it feels like this one is one that might sit nicely with the co-parent way, the work that you do around there. If I ask you to score it out of 10 in terms of how closely are you living that right now, what would you mark it?
That's a great question. I'm just looking at it because I made some notes too. I'd say 7.
Yeah.
But I want it to be 9 or 10.
Okay. And what might be the action or the next steps in terms of moving that dial up, if you like, on this from a 7 to an 8 and then to a 9? What comes to mind for you for?
Do that Instagram course. Keep going with that. Maybe, just have a think about what all the kind of the fears that I have around putting myself out there. Probably it's fear of criticism. So maybe look at that a little bit. And just have the end in mind, right? We know we all love Stephen Covey in our work, don't we? And have the end in mind. What is my end goal? My end goal is to enable an environment that can grow up in where it's safe and happy for them, even if their parents are separated. And I have a method of achieving that. And so my end goal is that is rolled out as far and widely as possible.
Yeah. So it feels like the tweak bit from what you were saying there is sort of sits in the impact piece, in terms of wanting to move that dial up so your reach is further. So more kids are happy and more kids are growing up in that environment. And perhaps the other tweak is in your own environment in terms of that belief around what you're doing and why you're doing it and the confidence around how you've got to get that message out, whether it's Instagram or whatever else you choose to do. So that's sort of like, what do we need to put in that soil to help Marcie feel that kind of confidence around that? So I think that's another interesting area for you to kind of explore, definitely. And has the conversation shifted your thinking or given you some clarity? Like what's come out of the conversation that you think maybe is new thinking?
Definitely the idea of kind of internal conflict as being conflict, if you see what I mean, kind of coming under the category. But also I've been playing in the back of my mind with the idea of how do you take a methodology like mine, apply it more broadly. So not just to children, but also kind of more broadly to kind of global events. And that's kind of come a bit more to the front of my mind since having this chat with you, because it's really helping me focus on the key word is conflicts, right? So, and how to resolve it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I think anything that we could do in the world to reduce conflict and to equip people with those skills to listen and hear the unsaid as well as the said and what's going on and all of those skills that you've developed through your career that you're now kind of sharing with people through your coaching, through your conflict resolution, through your co-parent way is needed in today's world. And so I'm really excited to see where you take that thought process for definite. A couple of questions to sort of, as we head towards the end of this conversation, not that I ever want our conversations to end, Marcie. If you were chatting to young Marcie, so Marcie sat there watching the news with mum and dad and like being super curious and asking loads and loads of questions. If you were talking to Marcie now, what would you say to her about her future world of work and what advice would you give her?
I tell her to back herself. Don't listen to the naysayers. Trust your instincts and just keep going. That is definitely what I would say to her. She was very shy until the age of 20 something. I was very shy till the age of 20 something. And part of that was kind of coming from the idea of fear of what people would think about me. That's definitely still there. And, just to say to her, just back yourself.
Thank you, Marcie. And I'm sure people will be curious to know more about Marcie, more about the co-parent way, more about your coaching, your executive coaching. So we will make sure this goes in the show notes, but how is it best for people to connect with you? What would you like to tell them about?
If you're interested in the co-parent way, please follow us on Instagram. Because that's where all our information goes. Lots of tips, lots of information, and you can find us at The Co-Parent Way. The website is the same, thecoparentway.com, and the book will be coming out in March, and it's Co-Parenting Method. If you're interested in finding out more about executive and leadership coaching, you can visit us at rollingstonecoaching.com.
Thank you, Marcie. Well, it kind of leaves me with, the opportunity to say what a pleasure it was to talk to you today, as always, and to thank you for being really open and honest about those memories and those sorts of moments in your career journey, and also your wisdom advice around why this stuff matters to you and the world at large. So I thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Zoe. It's always great to talk.
Thank you for tuning in to today's episode of the Career Equation podcast.
Stay connected with us on socials for more career insights, behind-the-scenes moments, and updates on upcoming episodes. And if you'd like to work with us, visit the Career Equation website or click the links in the show notes.
Remember, the Career Equation isn't just a podcast, it's a journey towards unlocking your full potential, enjoying your life, and doing remarkable stuff.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success.
And don't forget to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Your input shapes the future of our show.
Until next time, keep solving those career equations and pursuing your path to success. This is Erica Sosna
And Zoë Schofield. Signing off.